Welcome back to Combating Imposter Syndrome. This 4-week webinar explores the different ways that imposter syndrome can impact us, as well as steps and strategies that we can take to overcome those challenges so that we can enjoy the success that we've worked so hard for. My name is Sarah Huzar. I'm an intern in the Student Wellness and Counseling Center, and I am the host of this webinar series. Before we get into this week's topic, I do want to let you know that if you are struggling right now with imposter syndrome or anything else, you don't have to struggle alone. The counselors in the Student Wellness and Counseling Center are here to support you, and these services are free and confidential for students. The easiest way to make an appointment is by emailing Sherry at sherry.adams@sph.cuny.edu. This is week 3, and we're going to be talking about recovering from and leveraging setbacks. So part of the challenge here is to recognize that there is a spectrum between success and failure. A lot of the times people who are suffering and struggling with imposter syndrome, the only two outcomes to a situation that they can see is either success or failure. And the reality is, whether we succeed or not, we learn something from the experience. And so when we encounter something that doesn't quite go our way, the way to leverage that is to think about, what did we learn? And that's why I put this image up here. You know, Oprah she got fired at 23. And I love how Leslie Jones says she wasn't Oprah then, she was just somebody who had to get fired so she could become Oprah, and failing to succeed. And what that means is thinking about, what did we learn from this experience? And how are we going to use that information to our benefit in the future? Another way to think about failing to succeed is trial and error. A lot of times we don't know what's going to work until we know what doesn't work. So that's like in the comic. He sees that this is not the way to make iced tea, and he says, my iced tea is a failure. And if he gives up and doesn't try to figure out how to do it, then yeah, it is a failure. But if this is just one step on the way to ultimately figuring out how to make iced tea, is it really a failure, or was it a setback, or was it a learning experience? So how we think about failure or mistakes is just as important as how we think about success. And it means that we need to look at these failures or mistakes or setbacks as opportunities. Opportunities to learn what does work, what doesn't work, what we do like, what we don't like, what we're good at, what we're not good at. And then we can take that information and make conscious decisions about how we want to move forward. So this requires shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. What's the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset? So a fixed mindset wants to prove intelligence or talent. It ties back to that expert archetype that we talked about in week 1. And for fixed mindset, effort is bad. Effort means that you're not as smart as or talented as you thought, because if you were, you wouldn't need to put in that much effort to get what you needed to get done. In a growth mindset, the effort is actually what makes you smart or talented. They want to improve their intelligence or talent. So they feel much more empowered to take these setbacks, think about what they've learned, and move forward. As opposed to someone with a fixed mindset, sometimes when they encounter a challenge that makes them struggle, they don't want anything to do with it. It's scary, it makes them doubt themselves, and they back off. Another way to look at this is, if you're like me and you love pop culture, We can think about fixed mindset as Yoda. Do or do not. There's no trying. You have an ability or you don't. And if you want to think about a growth mindset, you can think about Dory from Finding Nemo. And Dory has some challenges, right? But just keep swimming and we're going to figure out how to overcome these things, how to get through them. So here are 26 different statements for self-talk for a growth mindset. And I want you to look at these and think about which of these phrases, knowing yourself and knowing what type of imposter experience you may be dealing with, what would be most helpful for you to remember when you encounter a setback? And not just what do you think would be helpful, but how are you going to remind yourself that you want to focus on this growth mindset? Will it be a note in your phone, a sticky note by your desk, a Pinterest board, a Twitter post? And think about how we can conceptualize setbacks as stepping stones towards our future success. Speaking of stepping stones, I want to take a moment to talk about how we can use the strategies that we learned in weeks 1 and 2 to help us cultivate a growth mindset and to deal more effectively with setbacks. When we experience a setback, we may have these wounded thoughts. Thoughts like, I'm a failure, I'm no good at this, I give up. And as we learned in week 2, our brains really like to give more attention to negative experiences and thoughts. What this can mean is that we might experience a stronger reaction to a single setback than we do to multiple successes. It might also mean that despite multiple successes, a single setback can make us feel like none of our previous efforts have mattered, have made a difference. Knowing we have this negativity bias, however, can help us evaluate setbacks more realistically. Can help us to take a step back and to think, okay, was this entire situation a failure? Or maybe are there some positives that I'm overlooking? And that can encourage us to have these healing thoughts instead, shift to healing thoughts. And you'll see that all of the healing thoughts are based in a growth mindset. So our wounded thoughts tend to be very fixed, absolutes. And healing thoughts can help us to recognize where we are and where we still want to go. Another technique that we can use to recover from our setbacks is to remember that we can always use the power of yet. We first talked about this in week 1, and for anybody that missed it, the power of yet allows us to recognize that we might not be where we want to be, but we do believe that we will get there. So yet holds space for that future success while still acknowledging that we have some work to do. And yet can also help us respond to setbacks instead of reacting to them. So our reactions are typically immediate, they're emotional, and they often come from a place of either fear or anxiety. Our fears that our mistakes really do mean that we're not good enough, that we don't belong, that will be found out. And using yet gives us the space to improve and allows us to respond rather than react. If I can't do this is our reaction, I can't do this yet is our response. So it just holds that little bit of space for us to not fall back into that all or nothing fixed mindset. And it gives us that little bit of space for us to keep working towards our goals. Just wanted to take a second to put the references up for anyone who wants to dig into this a little bit deeper. Also want to remind you that next week will be our final session, our final webinar. And next week we'll be talking about how we can prevent burnout and create more authentically self-affirming habits. So we'll move into our discussion section where we can share our stories and our experiences with setbacks and things that maybe haven't worked for us before, and maybe some techniques that do work for us that we can share together.